Okay, it is 10:03 on the 2nd of May, 2025. We're in the podcast studios at WEGL. My name is Lee McInnes, and I am conducting an interview as part of the Auburn University Veterans Resource Center Vietnam Veterans Oral History Project. Sir, would you introduce yourself?
My name is Richard Keeshan.
Okay, Mr. Keeshan. You've consented to this interview and you have filled out the release form. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you just a series of questions. I have questions that I want to go over, but it is a conversation. So if you want to expand, if you want to go into any other areas, if you want to, talk about other, things, I guess expand the question. Answer is the best way to say it. We are, and I say this at the beginning of all these interviews, specifically the ones dealing with Vietnam. The subjects we may be touching on may be sensitive, may bring back memories. If you need to take a break, if you want to, just catch your breath for a second, just feel free to tell me that. We have all the flexibility in the world in doing this.
I don't think that's going to be a problem.
I just always say that just to make sure.
Okay.
Okay. So first of all, let's collect some biographical information. How old are you?
76 would be 77 on the 14th.
Okay, well, I won't see you then, but happy birthday.
Thank you.
Where did you grow up?
Stamford, Connecticut.
And who were your parents?
Bill Keeshan and Margaret Keeshan.
And
mother and father.
what did they do for a living?
Well, my father was a haberdasher, sold hats, salesman, and my mother, excuse me, basically a stay-at-home mom, raised 4 kids, volunteered at various organizations. The one I remember the most is the hospital.
There in Stanford?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I have 3 brothers.
Okay, no sisters in the family?
No sister. I think I was supposed to be the girl.
Now,
my brother, the oldest brother, is 14 years older than me. Then it's 11, and then 8, and then so my closest brother is 8 years older than me. So I was a mistake, or supposed to be a girl.
so I was going to ask you where you fit in the plan there. Did your family have any history of military service? Were you a military family at all?
Well, my father was in the military. I think he lied about his age to get in, from what we can see with his draft notice or enrollment notice. He was born in 1897, so he was got a picture. One of my nephews does. It's about a 5-foot-long picture. One of these. He's in a cavalry uniform, World War I.
So did he serve overseas?
No, they were on their way, I think. They were being activated, and the war ended. So he was, I think, in his early 20s. 1897, with the war was over in 18, so he was 19, something like that.
Did you talk much to him about his service? Or?
No. My father didn't talk much about his history at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was common with folks in that time frame. He had a lot of military paraphernalia from World War I and some from World War II. Where he got that, I don't know, in an attic, and I don't know whatever happened to all that stuff. But it was fun to play with as a kid.
So you had that I guess as a kid you grew up knowing your father had been in the Army?
Yes.
Okay.
And then my oldest brother was, I think it was 52, 53. He was in the Army. Officer of some sort, and my next brother was, I understand he was a paratrooper, but it was, I think, guard only.
Mm-hmm.
And then my other brother was Navy for 4 years.
Now, do you know if they got drafted, or did they volunteer?
None of them were drafted.
Okay.
Yeah. I wasn't drafted, so we all volunteered.
So while you didn't grow up in what somebody might refer to as a military family, there was that history of service with your siblings.
Correct.
Okay. Do you think that had an impact on you when you decided to, you just said you volunteered. Do you think it had an impact on you knowing your brothers had done that?
Not really. I've always had a fondness for, I was in the Navy League as a preteen, which is a Navy affiliated organization, and flew down to Pensacola, Florida, and did some time on the Lexington, a couple of days, spent a few days at the academy, Naval Academy, and I enjoyed that kind of thing. But I wanted to fly. That was what I wanted to do, so I didn't care which branch of the service I went into as long as I could fly.
Okay, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Where did you go to high school?
Stamford, Connecticut is a Catholic high school, Stamford Catholic High School.
Now, was that an all-boys high school, or was it
No,
co-ed?
it was co-ed.
Okay. Because I sometimes wonder how going to an all-boys high school might affect some people's decision to go into the military. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that wasn't an issue.
So what did you do after you graduated from high school?
Well, I did what a lot of us did in the 60s. We took a shot at college, and either we didn't like it or they didn't like us. And so I went for about 3 semesters. And I knew that on the 3rd semester I wasn't going to go beyond that. I was going to join the military. So I joined the military, some kind of delayed entry, I think in November, so 68, and went active duty in March of 69.
Where did you go to college at?
Well, Sacred Heart University in Bridgeport, Connecticut was the first 3 semesters. After the military, I went through Enterprise Junior College for a quarter, and then went to Troy and finished off. I had so many credits. I took the CLEP test when I got out of the military, and the only thing I had left was the core courses. And so it was at Troy State, it was a hard go to taking 3 of your majors every quarter for a while, but it worked out.
Okay, so you've already told us you actually signed your papers to enlist in November 1968, and then you actually entered on the active duty in March of 1969.
Correct.
How long did you stay in the Army total?
3 years, 12 days.
Not that you know exactly.
I don't know why I remember it that specifically. Then after I got out, I joined the National Guard, and I stayed in that until 1976. And I was down here in Montgomery at that time. Actually, I was living in South Alabama, but yeah.
So you said you wanted to fly.
Right.
Did you have that guaranteed when you enlisted, or was it just they give you a path where it said this will give you your best chance?
Well, you can enter with that as a guarantee, and that was my initial intention. And I took my flight physical at the Coast Guard Academy in Connecticut, and I failed it. And I'm not really surprised. I'm deaf in my left ear, pretty much. Not total, but it's close. And I could not pass a Class 1 flight physical. You can fly with a Class 2, but you had to have a Class 1 to get into flight school. And so I asked the seaman, or whatever they call him, how do you beat the test? And he told me, and next time I took the flight exam, I've never had a problem. And so I went in initially as an enlisted. I selected to take a 67 and 20 course after basic, which was a helicopter maintenance repair. And after I graduated from that, for whatever reason, they made me an instructor rather than put me on a live aircraft. And I taught very introductory courses to Vietnamese students that were being run through Fort Eustis, Virginia. And then in the meantime, I had applied for flight school again and went through the whole process of testing, physicals, and all that, and was accepted subject to a class date. And I went about 4 or 5 months, and I didn't hear about it, so I called my congressman at the time, Riker, who became a senator and all that. But he called me back about a week later and told me I had a class date.
Okay.
He said they had already assigned it. He was just checking up on it.
So let's backtrack just a little bit. It's 1968, in November when you signed your enlistment papers. Why did you join the Army?
Well, initially, one of the reasons I stayed in college as long as I did at Sacred Heart was a 2-year degree. At the time, the Navy had a program, and I think the Air Force might have too. I can't remember, but the Navy had a NAV-CAV program. 2 years of college, and you go fly jets with them. and that's what I was intending to do. Well, they canceled the program, and I was really kind of upset about it because that's what I really wanted to do. And my dad gave me the brochure about Army helicopters, and I said, "Well, who wants to fly a junky helicopter?" Well, I changed my mind as history has shown, and so I signed up to do that. My dad actually showed me that I didn't even know about the program, but you only needed a high school degree to fly. So
Yeah, high school to flight school, as they called it when I was in.
it was.
So, when did you decide you wanted to fly military aircraft?
Oh gosh, probably when I saw John Wayne movies. I mean, it goes way back.
Okay.
I think everybody, it just looked like a lot of fun. So
you saw like flying leathernecks and
oh, yeah.
That was it?
Well, they're, yeah, more or less. I don't really remember the specifics of it,
sure.
but and I wanted to fly in combat. Now that just sounds strange even to me to say it, but that probably came from seeing too many war movies.
Okay. And this is kind of a question that we asked just to sort of see where people were. And you may not remember the answer to this question, but where'd you go to basic training at? Let me ask you that
Fort
first.
Dix, New Jersey.
Okay. So, and you were in Stamford, Connecticut. So, what did you take with you to basic training?
I think it was just a pair of jeans and a shirt, something like that. It wasn't, I may have had a suitcase with stuff in it. I don't really remember. You're right about that. Yeah. And it was actually, my father drove me up to Hartford, Connecticut, which is where I actually went in. And then they bust you down to Fort Dix.
Okay. So it's just sometimes you get, people will take that one little piece from their civilian life with them.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes interesting to hear about that.
Well, you do show up in your civilian clothes. And I don't remember if we had other, a couple days worth of supplies in there or not. But I know at basic training, I remember I didn't have a single thing with me anymore that belonged to. I don't know what they did with my civilian clothes. Probably got them back when I got out of basic. I don't remember.
What do you remember about basic training?
First of all, another thing that I had a problem with my flight physical was I was overweight. And they said that's not a problem. Basic training will take care of that. And it did. It took 70 pounds off me in 6 weeks.
Wow.
And I was weak as could be. I could barely do any of the stuff you're supposed to do with the overhead bars and push-ups and all that. But I got to the point where I could run like crazy. And I was road guard. And I don't know if I should say what the drill sergeant said to me when I got off the bus with my, after we'd gone through the supply room, gotten all of our stuff, got off the bus, and he said, "You fat SOB, run." And I started running that day. Actually, he said, "You fat GD FOB." SOB. And so he had me as a road guard, and I lost. And that's, you know what a road guard does?
I do, absolutely.
Okay, so you're doing a lot of running even on a slow march. And so that took the weight off of me. I couldn't eat for 3 or 4 days because I was so nauseous from running. You know how that does. And anyway, I enjoyed that. I went down to 44-inch waist down to 29 for graduation.
Wow.
And very quickly got back about 15 pounds, 20 pounds. And I was up to 185 was my comfort weight. I really liked that. From 170 back to 185 before I got through with 67 and 20 course.
Yeah,
I came back very quickly.
I thought losing I lost 35 pounds of basic training. Yeah. And I thought that was a lot. That, and I know what a road guard is because my drill sergeant made me the road guard just so I could get some extra running in. So, I'm well aware of that practice.
Yeah.
Okay, so you already said you were an aviation mechanic in the Army. Where'd you do, I guess it was, I don't know if it was called AIT back then, but your advanced training, where'd you do that at?
Fort Eustis, Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah, it's, I don't know if you know where that is.
I do.
Norfolk, okay.
Yeah.
Norfolk area.
Yeah, it's part of that.
Complex.
Yeah. It's now, I think, Joint Base Norfolk. Anyway, So, and you stayed there for a while. You said you were training Vietnamese students.
Uh, yes. After I finished my school, then they gave me. I was number one in my class, which was also another feat for me because I was a lousy high school student. Anyway, the they made me an instructor, and it was probably only going to be a short-term deal. And I think if I remember correctly, I had orders for Germany, and that's probably what caused me to call Congressman Riker to see, do I have a class date? Am I in the program? Whatnot? And because I didn't want to go to Germany because that was a stopping off point to go to Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't want to go as a crew member. I wanted to fly. So I was an instructor from August to about August of '69 to well, I went into flight school in May, but they gave me 30-day leave before that, so sometime in April.
Of 1970.
Yes,
Okay. So, tell me about the Vietnamese students you were training.
they were just ARVNs,
And Arvin is,
uh, Army of Vietnam.
yeah, just I.
Yeah, the they didn't speak English. Some had just a touch of it. Uh, it was kind of interesting because to communicate, I'd have a pointer and I'd hit the tail of the Huey and say Huey, and they'd say the word back to me. And so I was teaching the orientation courses.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have most of the instructors there were one or two tours in Vietnam already, and I don't even know what to do. So. I can take one apart and point to different parts of it, but I did not have the experience of actually working with a live aircraft.
So,
I was strictly a point and
mm-hmm.
name.
Did you have a translator there to work with at
No,
all?
we didn't. I also had a class where there were some Americans in it. It's just an introduction, of course, again, explaining the Huey's characteristics, its capabilities, and things like that.
I'm just trying to, I think you're probably the first person I've ever talked to that actually had that experience. You're standing in front of a group of Vietnamese students trying to explain the parts of a rotor wing aircraft, and you don't speak the same language.
Well, it's actually they had a hangar and probably had 8 or 10 aircrafts in it.
Mm-hmm.
These were supposedly in 72 hours they could be made flyable.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't get in them. Not with what I know in hindsight. But I'd have maybe 6 or 7 students, ARVNs at a time, and we'd walk around the live aircraft or the aircraft sitting on the floor, and they got to feel and touch it and sit in it and do things like that. So it was this kind of thing they needed in order to get a feel for what they were about to actually learn. And I don't know if the instructors that actually taught them how to do maintenance and all that on the aircraft, how that worked, because I didn't get involved with that part of it.
So, did you find the Arvin students motivated? Did they want to learn? Did they seem like they cared to be there?
That's difficult to say because they, from what I was told, and I don't know how true this is, they were pretty much just pulled off the farms, their area that they had very little education. So some probably were, some weren't. I do know that if they didn't do well in school, they were going back home, and there may not be a good reception for them. I know the South Koreans had the same problem. One instance, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but one of the South Koreans did something he shouldn't have done, and the commander came in and just beat him in front of everybody and dragged him out, and home he went. We don't know whatever happened to him, of course.
So then you went to flight school
Yes.
at Fort Rucker.
No.
Where'd you go to flight school at?
Fort Walters, Texas. That was the primary school.
Okay, I was not aware of that.
Yeah. It's about 30 miles, I think. I may be wrong, west of Fort Worth. And it's not a fort anymore. It became a prison, but I think it's there's some memorials there and all that.
Okay.
But no, that was 5 months. It was primary in a TH-55, which is a Hughes 300
Mm-hmm.
versus a Hughes 500, which is what I ended up flying, but it's called the Loach.
Yeah.
And the 086 is had a manual governor and all that. It was a fun era. I really enjoyed flying it. And that was from, I got there, I think we actually started on May 8th. And I don't know why I remember that, but I was there earlier than that, but they put you in a holding company until everybody showed up, and then they marched us off to our company location where we would work out of. And it was they screamed and hollered at you a lot. The TAC officers did, and they were warrant officers who had one or two tours again in Vietnam as pilots. And it was interesting because on the way over to the company, they're screaming and hollering. Now everybody's been in basic training, and I'd had almost a year of prior service, and I would have thought everybody would have understood that their job is to scream and holler at you, and your job is just to ignore them. But we had about 10 or 12 people quit on a half-mile walk or march. And then they broke us down into smaller companies, and we had about 35 or 40 in our company. I don't remember what we started with. We ended with 33. And the quarters were great. It was a cinder block building, and the drill sergeant, I say drill sergeant, the chief warrant officer in charge of us, he ran the company, but he didn't go with us to the field or anything like that. And so we would fly, they alternated the days and timings, but we'd fly in the morning, go to the classroom in the afternoon, or the opposite, just depending on how the schedule worked. And then in our rooms, two of us were assigned to a room. And we had our lockers, and of course you had to hang them just right. You had to roll your underwear, and everything had to be perfect spot. You had to carve on your heel of your shoe, 2 for even days and 1 for odd days, and you had to alternate. No static displays. Everything had to get used. And then they had demerits, and I got a lot of demerits. And it really bothered me. After about 6-7 weeks, I'm getting all these demerits. I can't get a pass. I'm having to go out and do what I saw on television. Some of these, in the rain, I'm marching a square, where I had to, and there were other folks that had this too. But literally, we had to, as punishment for getting so many demerits, it was half the size of a football field maybe, and you had to do the.
So what were you getting demerits for?
They didn't like the way my locker was set up, and or the bed was made. All kinds of things. And I was having a hard time understanding why I was getting these demerits. But it eventually showed me why. They want to stress you out. That's their sole function, to see how well you handle stress.
Yeah.
And I wish they could have found another way to do it, because it lasted almost the whole 5 months at Fort Walters. And the thing that stopped it for me was they made me squad member of the latrine, and we all rotated jobs, various. And I became a squad member. We had no air conditioning, and the gnats and the bugs were just terrible, and the windows were open. They'd come in, and every morning we had to clean my squad, and I would clean that latrine. Now you had to shine all the drain things. Everything had to shine, and the floor had to be. But the bugs drove us crazy because they'd fly into your face while you're shaving and all that. So I said, let's close everything up, and I'll spray it with bug spray. And so we did. And I got back from flying that morning, and I had 10,000 demerits, which is, you're not supposed to get more than a couple hundred the entire, and I've already had thousands. So, and so They said I killed a lot of friendly aviators. And, and I was convinced. I said, okay, they've been trying to throw me out. They're going to do it. And my roommate was a E7, former E7, and grizzly old guy. And he just said, don't worry about it. Well, I did worry about it. And then later that evening, I was called down to the CO's office. And it's a formality. You have to bang on the door, sir, candidate Keeshan reporting as ordered, sir. And I walked in and had my TAC officer and the XO and the CO. The XO was standing over here. The CO, my TAC officer was right here. I couldn't really see him. And of course, the CO was at the desk. And he laid into me about my killing the friendly aviators. And he said, so what do you have to say to that? And I tried to be polite. I think I used a foul word here or there, but I said, sir, you're greatly mistaken. I don't know why you thought they were friendlies. Those were enemy. I killed every one of them. And I'm going to do it tomorrow and the next day and the next day until I don't have that responsibility anymore. And the CO, he put his hand over his mouth, and I could tell thought it was. And the XO had to turn around, and I heard my TAC officer kind of giggle. So I was immediately told to get out, and I was dismissed. I went back up, and I was packing up to leave. I thought I was gone. And the TAC officer comes up and says, you've got 10 minutes to get everything back together. And I got a weekend pass that weekend. So it was kind of interesting. And there were guys, I felt sorry for a couple of them. They never got a demerit, and all of a sudden they got dumped on, got tons and tons of demerits, little things, and they actually quit because of it. And we had several prior service individuals that were Green Berets, and they actually swapped my drawers out with them. Who they didn't get demerits, and I'd still get 150, 200 demerits on my sock drawer or whatever. And so we all knew it was a game before the bug incidents occurred. But I was taken back. I thought they really wanted me out. Flying was just fun.
Well, that leads me to my next question. You wanted to be a military aviator since you were a kid. Now you're actually flying military aircraft. And rotor wing aircraft are a special kind of difficult. I'm not an Army aviator, but my brother was an Army aviator for 23 years, and I can't count how many Army aviators I know. Flying rotor wing aircraft is a special kind of challenge. How'd you like the flying part?
Oh, that was fabulous. And I remember my first instructor got in. He picked the aircraft up to about 2-3 feet off the ground, and we just flew in a straight line, never got any higher than that. And there was in Texas there's bushes and such in the way, and he just start weaving in and out of them, and I said, oh, this is fun. And later on when I actually got to, I forgot why it's very close to my first ride. I was with another instructor, and we went out over the Brazos River. We flew out towards the Brazos, probably at 50 feet, and as fast as that thing could go was about 80 miles an hour. So we were trucking along, and all of a sudden he does a dive, and it scared me half to death. We had flown into the Brazos Canyon, and he went down and we flew up the river a ways, and he said, this is where I like to go fishing. And we sat down on a sandbar, and he said, isn't this pretty over here, back here? And picked up, and off we went back to actual training. And
it's just the motion detector. Hold on, I got to get up and move around, but keep going.
Oh, okay. So I, again, that added to the thrill of it.
Or maybe we'll just do the rest of this in the dark.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I've got enough light to read.
So I mean, it was just and everybody enjoyed the flying, and a lot of course, you think you're doing a lot of daring stuff. But anybody who flies, whether it's fixed wing, helicopter, whatever, they're going to have things occur that they think, oh, wow, I worked my way through it. But after a while, you realize it's kind of normal stuff. that's going to happen.
I'm gonna have to flip these lights because my night. There we go.
There you go. And
motion detector was way over there. Okay.
We lost quite a few candidates in that first half of the summer. Once you, the first, let's see, we started probably about the middle of June. We stopped losing candidates. If you didn't solo, you were going to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you had so many hours, and there was the military discipline where some people couldn't handle it, and then there were physicals again, and some people, for whatever reason, they found something that disqualified them from flying. So that was always a concern with me because of the ear.
Yeah.
But so anyway, after we graduated from Walters, went to Fort Rucker, and it's of course now it's Fort Noblesville.
Yeah.
But most of us still refer to it as Rucker. Now, I met Noblesville one time back in the 80s, and so I don't mind it being Noblesville. But
my brother, who's a big traditionalist, knew Novacell well.
okay.
So he's like, he likes things. He doesn't like change, but in that case, I think the aviation community was really kind of okay with that one.
They were.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Yeah, I'm not going to repeat his story, but he has a fascinating story.
He did.
And you just don't know how somebody could do all that. But anyway, so it gets named by the same person. Might use Noblesville in one sentence and Rucker in the other.
Yeah, I try to use it. I say my brother was stationed at Fort Rucker, and I went to Fort Rucker many occasions. But then now I try to use it correct to the period of time I'm referring to.
Yeah.
So you came out of Fort Walters, you went to Fort Rucker. What did you do at Fort Rucker?
Well, I had a lot more freedom.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't really harassed anymore. Had structure, but we were not demerited or anything like that. And they started off with flying the Bill 13, the old bubbled instrument training.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fun. I enjoyed it. I didn't mind having the hood on. I didn't care. I followed the instruments, and there's some folks that had trouble doing that. We were always told, all of us, believe your instruments at all costs. Just believe the instruments. And there were times I thought I was upside down, but I believed my instruments, and most of us probably had that experience. And then that was for a few hours. I don't remember, 30 hours, 20 hours. And then we progressed into the Huey, which is what everybody was, really clamoring to get into. And that was an experience. And usually it was 2 students and an instructor in the aircraft. And now, not initially, the instructor would be in the front seat, and then one of the students, and then after a period of time, the students would swap out. The student would sit in the back and watch and learn from the other students' mistakes or successes, and just get a feel for that aircraft even in the back seat. And so that went on, and then it got to the point where it was just strictly 2 students in the front seat with the instructor in the back. And then from there it progressed just to 2 students and no instructor. The instructor would fly overhead supervising 3 or 4 Hueys flying around. And we worked various stage fields south of Rucker. I can't remember all their names now. But, practice takeoff and landings. There would be areas set up for confined area operations where you'd, go into an area that wasn't much bigger than the aircraft, and the trees would be 60, 70 feet tall or such like that. And so that was all. We all had a good time doing that, as far as I can tell.
This whole time, you're training as an Army aviator. You're learning how to fly rotor wing aircraft. It's 1970, 71. The Vietnam War is in full swing. You've got to know that a majority of you are going to be going to Vietnam, and the longevity of Army aviators in Vietnam, it was not necessarily the longest for a job. How did that impact you in your training? Did it ever come up? Was it something you talked about?
No, it was just understood you were going to do that. Uh, those that had 2 tours in Vietnam didn't have to go back if they didn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And we had maybe 5 or 6 people that had a tour or two, and I can't remember. But I only know of 1 or 2 that chose not to go back. They all wanted to go back as pilots. And the only time I was really rather ignorant, even when I got through with flight school, because then I had orders to fly the Jet Ranger, transition from the Huey to the Jet Ranger, and a friend of mine in my class, my company, got orders to fly the 086, and I really didn't understand the mission differences in combat zone, and so he evidently understood it quite well because he started to cry. He had 2 kids, a wife, and all this kind of stuff. And I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I'll die doing that." And so I swapped with him. And then I found out what I'd done. And so, but I love the 086. If I had the money, I'd buy one today.
And you know, that incredible design, that same basic design is still being used by the Special Operations Forces today. That's how durable
Oh, gosh.
and the longevity of that aircraft.
Now, I was fortunate. I never crashed, where the aircraft falls apart and all that. But I talked to folks that hit the ground at 100 miles an hour plus and came running out of the aircraft because of the way it was designed, the roll bar system, everything was designed to just fall off.
And that eggshell shape
yeah.
is just meant to deflect impacts. Yeah.
And so survivability was high. And but still, the nature of being a Loach pilot was very dangerous in and of itself because we'd fly it as close to the ground as you could get, treetop level. We'd fly. I didn't fly under branches. I knew some that did that. I wouldn't fly. The function of the thing was to identify enemy activity, not necessarily engage, but in reality, you were looking to engage.
So you're at Fort Rucker. Did you go to Vietnam directly after Rucker?
Yes.
Or did you?
Yeah, other than a 30-day leave.
How'd you feel when you got your orders?
Well, it's expected.
So it was no big deal. It was just no shock.
No, I don't think my parents took kindly to it.
I was about to say, 30 days leave, did you go back to Connecticut?
Yes. Yeah.
And how was that month spent with your parents?
Well, no one talked about it. Not even my brothers and myself. We didn't talk much about it at all that I remember. Mm-hmm. And I know my mother didn't. And, when time to go, we were at my brother's house, and, it was kind of a going-away party, and they called a cab to take me to the bus station, which took me to, again, it's Fort McGuire, which is right next to Fort Dix.
Yeah, McGuire Air Force Base. Yeah.
And, the Air Force Base.
Yeah.
And that's where I got on the plane to go to Vietnam.
So you flew from New Jersey to Vietnam. Was it direct or were there?
Well, I remember we stopped in Anchorage to refuel.
Okay.
And then there was, I can't remember if it was Okinawa or Guam or where we stopped again. But it was.
But there wasn't any transition time. You got on a plane in New Jersey, and you really got off the plane in Vietnam.
In Vietnam, yeah.
So what was what was you're going down the steps and off the aircraft into Vietnam?
Yeah. What's
your first impression?
Well, I've read so many people's comments on that. Some said the humidity and the heat overwhelmed them, and I didn't feel the heat overwhelming me because I've been here in Alabama, and even though I left in April, still you have some pretty hot, humid days. But and then Fort Walters was during the summer, so I was used to that. I'd felt that before, so that the heat and all that didn't bother me. But you're looking around Okay, are they going to start shooting at us? You know, you're all wondering that. And then we get on these buses. And the first thing you notice is they're OD green buses, but they have chicken wire over all the windows. And I've not talked to anyone who didn't have this comment. It was like, what the heck is that for? And there's a corporal or a sergeant or somebody standing at the front of the bus telling you, you know, just pack yourselves in. And he sits there with a giggle. He says, they throw grenades at us, and that's to keep the grenades from coming in the bus. And so that got, we had no idea what was happening after that. That's what they call a WTF moment, you know. And so then we drove to where we were being put up for. I was in a tent now, and I was there for about 4 or 5 days. Caught a C-130 and went to Chulai,
Mm-hmm.
where my unit was at the time. So
Okay, and you were a warrant officer at this point.
yes,
W1 or
W1.
okay. And then you went to Chulai. How long was it after you arrived in Vietnam before you flew your first mission?
You know, I don't I don't fully remember. I got there April 15th, 16th, and it's probably May 1st, May 2nd, somewhere in that time frame. And I wouldn't really call it a mission. I was assigned to Loach, and another guy that was a scout pilot was assigned to Loach, and he said, "You follow me." And so we went out, and it was kind of fun. I chased him. That's what I was supposed to keep up with him, and he'd do these weird turns, loops, not loop, you know, climb over trees and drop back down. And I stayed right on his tail. I was scared I was going to hit him a couple of times, and we got back. They said, "Okay, he knows what to do." Next thing I know, I'm with a experienced Loach pilot as an observer. I'm an observer, and we were out on a mission. So it was early May of '71.
Okay, so within like 6 weeks, you've gone from Fort Rucker, Alabama, to you're now flying combat missions in Vietnam.
Yes.
Was did that seem like a natural transition to you? Was it disorientating to go
You
do
knew
that
you were going
change?
to. I don't know why my throat's flying. You knew you were going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was expected. What I didn't expect is on the team lead that I flew with, who flew Loaches, was called Red. And I don't remember his real name.
Mm-hmm.
Just the team lead. And so he looked at me and he says, "You know, I've never taken an FNG out without getting shot down. So good luck. Let's see if we can do it again." And so I didn't know how serious he was or was not, but I think he was serious in hindsight. We flew over a village, which I never did again. As I was a pilot, I never flew low level over a village, but this guy did. And there was a Papa San, you know, the long beard, the big robes with his hands up the robes, and about 20 kids around him. And we flew over him, and our gunner was in the back. Will said he's got an AK, and I started to curl up behind my pilot because he was facing the guns. I wasn't, and pieces of the cockpit started to disappear. And our gunner shot the old man. And the first question the pilot asked was, "Red, did you have to hit any of the kids?" And the gunner said, "I might have hit one or two, but I got the old man." And that was a wow moment, because not only was I doing a combat mission, I was now in combat. So that was something that got my attention very quickly. We had to put her down. We started losing fuel and all this kind of stuff, and I think the crew chief did a temporary fix on whatever the problem was. And we flew it back home, but we had an escort in case we didn't make it. But that was an eye-opening moment for me.
So when you get back on the ground, and later on that day, and you're processing all of that, How does that make you feel? How do you work through that?
You know, I don't. I know we went to the officers club and had a few drinks, and you know the club has bands go through it, and so you have Vietnamese, Koreans, Germans, Americans, Australians, and they're all singing that we want to get out of this place. You know, each night it's a different group or something. About 2 or 3 times a week they have groups there. I don't remember anything specific
Okay.
about that first encounter um, at all. I really don't. I don't remember processing anything. I don't remember thinking this, that. I have a feeling that in hindsight that I was very much aware that I was now in a dangerous environment and very nervous. I prayed a lot. I mean, it's almost, you can't help it. And then you just, the next day you do what you're supposed to do. And I got trained. I was released to fly, just me and the gunner. I wasn't, there were some Loach pilots that I thought were just crazy, insane. And I know one that shot down twice in the same day, and I know one that had to run a couple hundred yards, and he could hear the VC screaming at him or giving orders, you know, whatever they're saying, he didn't know. But now I took fire almost every time. Every time, you almost get shot at every day. It's just something you expect, but you don't know it until it's over. So it's your senses as you're flying out to the area of operations, what we call the AO. We'd be at maybe 3,000, 2,500, 3,000 feet. And then when you realized you were getting close to actually beginning your operation, then you turned off the radio. You didn't listen to Armed Forces Radio Vietnam. You went inside your own head and prepared for it. And then when we got to the AO, you would drop down and begin work. Now I had 2 Cobras and a Huey above my head, and my biggest fear was I'd do something so stupid I'd get my crew chief killed. And I did that for about 4 months until early August.
And what unit were you with then? Do you remember?
Oh yeah, F Troop 8th Cav, which was AmeriCal Division, 196 Infantry Brigade, and F Troop 8th Cav.
Okay. So you spent, you said 4 months flying,
About that, yeah.
flying Loaches.
Yes.
Okay. And then what did you do?
Well, they called me in and said, we're going to put you back in the Huey. And then I flew with a fellow named Green, team lead for. But I got to know him. Actually, we were friends on Facebook until he passed away, about a year ago. But and I thought I might be. They said I scared my gunner, and several of them finished the whole year. Most of them didn't finish a year. They just, it's either stress or anxiety or whatever. And I was getting careless, I think, after 4 months, and I think I was scaring the gunner and not really approaching everything the best way that I should have. And I wasn't scared. I was just
Okay.
I was scared to kill my gunner, but I was also taking chances didn't need to take. And then I started flying with Green, and I flew, I don't know, for about 3 weeks with him. And then one day I come out to get in the aircraft on another mission, and we had a mailbox at the hooch, and I looked at it, and I was now an aircraft commander, so I no longer flew with him, I flew with somebody else. Mm-hmm. And after about a week or two of doing that, they moved me to Nighthawk, and that was, I think, their initial intentions, go from Loach to Nighthawk. Mm-hmm. The Nighthawk ran similar to the 6.
Okay, so let me interrupt you for a second because I just realized we hadn't covered it. What was your mission as in a Loach, and we haven't explained this either. A Loach is a light observation and attack helicopter. What was your mission in the Loaches?
To locate the enemy activity.
And you did that how?
Well, as I said, we were a team called a hunter-killer team,
Mm-hmm.
and I was the hunter. The Cobras were the killer, and the Hueys were recovery and extraction of ground, because occasionally we put ground troops on the ground too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd fly around using the terrain the best that I could for cover, and also looking for enemy activity, look for footprints, fires, anything that would show that somebody was in that area. And so we were sometimes, just a couple feet off the ground. We'd go at about 40, 45 knots. So we were going slow. And I always had my gunner towards tried to always have the gunner towards where the enemy might. If there's a tree line, I wouldn't put the gunner on the right side.
Yeah.
If the tree line was on my left, the gunner would be on my. And so what would happen is you'd fly up that tree line and come back down, go in the other direction. So the gunner was facing that tree line. And when someone shot at you, usually he would know it first because he could see the muzzle flash, and I would hear it going through the aircraft. Or I might hear I don't know whose pop I would hear, but you'd hear the gunfire. And then as soon as that occurred, I'd get the hell out of there, and the Cobras come in and just blow the hell out of that location. And the gunner would throw a Willie Pete or smoke or something out. And so once they came in, then you go back down and see what happened. Never saw a dead guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I know most of us never saw anyone that was. I mean, you didn't see any blood and guts doing what I did for a living, even if you created it. So go make sure, see if the guy's still there, if he's still shooting at us, and then if not, continue on doing what we were doing.
So then you transition into you're flying Hueys.
Now I'm back in the Huey.
And just before you went to the Nighthawk missions, what was your mission? Were you troop transport? Were you flying air support?
We were there to pick up. I viewed the job as a Huey pilot there, recovery. That's what we were called, recovery. When the Loach got shot down, we were to go get the crew.
Okay.
And so I did about 4 or 5 recoveries, and that's when I got my orders for go to Nighthawk. But that's interesting too, because you're going into now where activity just occurred, and the Cobras didn't. When the aircraft went down, the Cobras didn't come in shooting rockets and miniguns. They might shoot miniguns around where the aircraft went down if they could see it. Sometimes they would go down in the trees and you couldn't see, and we'd get as close as you could to that part of the tree line, and our crew get off and go in and see if they could find them. And never saw none of our guys were ever seriously hurt the time I was with that unit, and so that was what I considered the primary job. Now, occasionally, we'd find something of real interest, and we would insert what we called the blues. We had a couple squads of grunts, and so they would get inserted into the area and then do a search for enemy activity. And the OH-6 then would become flight protection for the ground troops.
Okay. So I'm just, having, we're one of the things we're writing up was for the posters. We showed you where Catherine Cater Hall. One of the things we're going to be talking about is one of the posters about a significant events in the war is going to be the battle in the Idrang Valley in 1965, where the aircraft were just basically used to put troops on the ground and pick them up when they. Now in 5 years, you're running incredibly complex operations that have got multiple moving parts and a large number of aircraft. How did you feel you integrated into that larger operation? Do you feel like you were that air mobile operations has sort of reached their peak at that point, or were you still developing tactics and techniques?
we were strictly a hunter-killer team.
Okay.
And the assault helicopter units are still very real and ongoing. Most of the friends of mine that I knew that flew in Vietnam were, assault helicopters and did the massive insertions. You know, 5, 6, 10 aircraft or more.
Yeah.
I did a couple of those. Again, it was with Arvins, and it was it was in September-ish of '71, and I'm in the Huey. Matter of fact, that's the only time I was shot down in a Huey was fooling with those Arvins, and I didn't like that at all. Nobody did. And when I left Vietnam, they asked me if I wanted to stay in the military, and I said no, because they were going to send me home, put me in do something here with me at Rucker, and then send me back to Vietnam, and I wasn't going to work with the Arvins anymore.
Okay. So you went into Nighthawk missions.
Yeah.
What are those, or what were those?
The way we worked it, now, a lot of it's all different types of. Each unit has their own shape as to how they actually operate, but way we worked it, we had 2 Hueys. One would fly, it was strictly at night, and we'd fly at maybe 200 feet above the trees. And we had a Xeon searchlight, million or something like that candle-watt power, and had miniguns, twin minis. I think it was twin minis, and then a 50 caliber on the other side of the aircraft, plus the regular crew with their 60s. And then there was the second aircraft would fly at about 4,000 feet and throw flares out. So you're flying along, and we'd alternate. Some days I'd fly low, some days I'd fly high. And you have this. Everybody says, "Well, doesn't that searchlight make you a target?" There's a yes and a no to that. Yes, but usually I never saw this, but if you caught a bunch of folks in the open in the middle of the night with that searchlight, I was told they'd act like deer and freeze. And so they didn't have much of a chance after that. But we did have a lot of contact, but we don't know exactly what happened because they were in the bushes, that stuff. Didn't see anything. But except for one night, and I looked out to the right, crew chief, gunner. The crew chief and the gunners were, in the back. They were the pointed up. So there's 4 silhouettes on the mountain range over there, and you could see 4 people walking along the crest of a ridge. And so we called brigade to find out if we had any friendlies in the area, because that really was stupid to walk that crest like that.
Yeah.
And for either side. But we were told there no friendlies in the area. Take them out. So we did. The gunner opened up with those miniguns, and zip, and that's all it took was a zip. And he said he saw all 4 of them fall. Now I didn't see. I'm looking straight ahead, looking at the instruments, looking out for trees, and the pilot the same way, the other pilot. And so about an hour later, 45 minutes later, we were notified that a ground unit had worked its way to that crest, and they only found 2 bodies. Crew chief said, nope, got all 4. And he said, well, you only got 2. I don't know what happened, but you cut them in half. And the crew chief said, check the other side of the ridge line. And they found the other halves.
Okay.
So that was a wow moment for me too, because that's when you actually knew you did something that you really don't want to do, but that's just the nature of the job.
So, and you did that for the remainder of your time in Vietnam?
No, I did that until December. And in that time frame, occasionally we'd back out of Nighthawk and do insertions, as I told you, with the Arvins. And then in December, the CO came to me and told me I was being transferred to a flight brigade, which was flying the generals and the congressmen and senators. Yeah. It was a VIP type thing. And I don't know what I thought of it. I thought I was being somebody was mad at me and throwing me out of the unit. But he gave me a picture, and I still have it, of a skull with cross bayonets underneath it and Merry Christmas on the top. Somebody from the brigade got that all put together and made pictures of it and sent them out as postcards to the brass throughout I Corps. And so they were identified. If you want to see combat, we're going to put you in a combat unit. And that's what they did. And I went to the two of us from my unit went to brigade headquarters to fly the generals and such. And that was great because 2 weeks later, I don't know why I have a frog in my throat.
Usually we have water in here, but I don't see any.
I flew the Bob Hope show, 71 Freedom Hill, when he did the show there. And I was initially signed to fly first ship. And I was going to, that meant I was going to fly Bob Hope himself. I said, this is great. And this captain comes up and says, no, you're not. I am. So I got bumped to the second ship, which might have even been better because it was nothing but about 6 or 7 girls, drop dead gorgeous, showgirls. And I don't remember what their name was. I have it written down somewhere in my little notebook. But so we flew and there was another couple of aircraft behind that. And we flew them all over to Freedom Hill at Da Nang, and then we were on. I didn't even have to use my ticket. My ticket's framed at home right now, the Bob Hope Show ticket. And so got to watch the show and all that, and then went out to help Bob Hope get on his plane. I actually held his. He looked on stage like he was 10 years. I mean, jumping all over the place, laughing and joking. When that thing was over, he was worn out. You realized he was an old man, and he was late 60s, I think, then. And so I thought I was going to get on the second, fly the girls out to a carrier that was off the coast, and I had another captain tap me on the shoulders. And so all the crews got changed out at that point, except for the first ship that flew Bob Hope the first time. And that was I said, this is pretty good duty. And then, so that was pretty much it.
Okay.
With that. It flew congressmen, senators. There was a couple of fun instances with that. And I'm not going to name the congressman because I know he's gone, but his family might still be around. I was flying him from Da Nang over to brigade headquarters, and do that. It's south of Da Nang. Marble Mountain was here, Da Nang was here, and brigade was here. So we're flying straight over the rice paddies, and I was probably 100 feet off the rice paddies. No bad guys were in that area. It was considered really relatively secure, and I had a firelight come on. And now we flew with the doors off. I mean, they weren't on the aircraft, period. So the crew chief climbs out onto the skids. Now he's strapped in, but has a safety harness of some sort, and looks into the panel. You can look in to see if there's a fire in the engine. He said, negative, there's no fire. And I said, okay. I said, then we'll continue on. He says, sir, but we got a congressman. And you could tell in his voice, we wanted to have fun with this congressman. And I said, that's not a bad. I was thinking, okay, yeah, we need to put it down. We got a high-ranking guy. And I called a Mayday and had to put the aircraft down due to firelight. And I landed on a rice paddy. They're, what do you call it? Just the dirt. That's
the little berm. Yeah.
Berm, thank you. And I had my gunners get on outside the aircraft with their guns, and one of the crew chiefs or gunner, he just started shooting the M60, and there's a bunch of people out there farming, and he was shooting up here. I mean, the bullets weren't going anywhere, dangerous. And I remember thinking, these guys are they didn't even look up. They didn't stop plowing. They didn't stop doing what they were doing. They couldn't have cared less that we were there doing that. And they weren't scared. And then I got everybody back on board because the Cobras started coming at us, and they flew over our head about 100 feet over our heads. And I said, okay, we got it checked out, no fire, and flew to brigade. And the general, I'm not sure what his name was, he just walked up to me and looked me straight in the eye, didn't say a word. It was one of those meanest looks I've ever seen. But when we were on the dike, that was the dike, we got the congressman off, in case there really was a problem. and he slipped and fell into the rice paddy itself, and he was covered with the cow manure and the dirt and all that stuff. And he was excited as hell when he got back to. Oh, he had a war story. So,
when did you arrive in Vietnam?
oh gosh, what did that say? April. I think it was the 16th
Okay.
of 71.
And when did you leave?
March 16th of 72. I left a month early. I was with the brigade headquarters, but I wanted to. I just got tired of flying that type of flying. I wasn't getting many hours, so I went back to a CAV unit. They never changed the orders, but I was with Delta First of the First for a few weeks, and they didn't know what to do with me because they knew I was short, relatively short. Anyway, I'm in the hangar and I'm doing stuff there, and I started flying test flights. And when that was one day, he said, "You want to fly combat?" I said, "Yeah, let's go back." So do combat. And I was getting on the aircraft the next morning. The CO pulled me off and says, "You're grounded." I looked at him, "Why?" He said, "You just got orders to go home, and nobody's going to die within 30 days in my unit." So that was basically, other than a few test flights, the end of my flying was in February.
Okay. So let me go back and ask some sort of broad questions. March 1972. How old were you?
Oh, gosh. I was born in 48, so what was that, 24, 23?
Okay.
So 48.
All right. You said at one point when you were flying Loaches,
Yeah.
one of the reasons why they might have pulled you off and sent you to Huey's was because you were taking too many risks.
I probably was. And I mean, it wasn't risk per se. I wasn't using the terrain the way I probably should have. I might have been actually too stiff. So I don't really know. I do know that.
So it wasn't that you'd become so comfortable with combat that you were beginning to ignore some basic rules.
Probably, yeah. I guess I don't know what the summary was, but I went from that to doing recoveries, which was still flying into the and then doing Nighthawk, where you're silhouetted against the sky. Everything's dangerous over there, so it's just moving from one type of danger to another. And I knew guys that he flew a Loach. He was in the unit, and I don't know. It's a month and a half later, I saw him with his duffel bag. I said, "What's up?" He said, "Going home," and never found out a reason why or anything. So I think some couldn't handle it. He was an excellent Loach pilot, been shot down numerous times, but I think that probably had something to do with it. My hooch mate got shot down twice and over a 3-day period, and I was shot down. I call it 3 times, but since the aircraft didn't have to be towed out, that's more of a precautionary. It's getting shot down in the Huey. That was getting blown out of the sky. But yeah, no real. I'm just guessing that's why. Maybe I showed signs of something else. I don't know.
So what happened? What happened the day you got shot down?
In a Huey or a Loach?
The one where you got your words blown out of the sky.
Yeah. That was on September 9th of 71. I was pulled up. We were pulled up. We had a major operation going on, and we had the briefing the night before, and everybody got radio frequencies and passwords and all this kind of stuff, and we were going to fly out that morning to an unknown location as a staging field, and so we flew out, and Chinooks brought in huge fuel bladders. And I mean, it looked like you went from an empty field to a town almost of just nothing, helicopters and supplies and tents and all this sprung up in a matter of just 45 minutes. And now what got us all super nervous was after that was done, we hear this bill. And out of the woods walks a guy pushing a cart selling Coca-Cola and ice cream. And we laughed, and then we said, if they know this, they know what we're going to do.
Somebody knew where you were there. Yeah.
And the night before, the briefing knew. They said they're doing an arc light on a mountain range just north of Keeshan.
And an arc light was a B-52 strike.
And my roommate at the time was the Loach pilot. He did a BDA that next morning, real early.
Bomb damage assessment.
Damage assessment. And he came to me and said, because he knew I was going to fly an insertion of Arvins on the top of the mountain. And he said, you don't want that mission. That place is crawling. The B-52 strike didn't do any damage at all to people. And, of course, I don't have any choice. Neither did the other aircraft. There's two. I was going to put, I think 15 or 20 Arvins on the top of this mountain. And so we flew in to do that, and the first aircraft landed, and they got off, and the aircraft took off, and then we got there, and then as we took off, we could hear gunshots. We knew we were being shot at, but we didn't take any hits or anything. The Arvins we dropped off, the gunner told me, he said, they threw their weapons down and ran. I said, what? Yeah. So, that was not an unheard of occurrence, but here we are. We knew this was supposed to be a really hardcore enemy territory, and these guys just threw their weapons away. They sent off an emergency. They wanted to be recovered. And so the CO said, go back and get them. Now, the guy I was flying with was a second tour, and he said the first aircraft was too weak an aircraft to do an emergency extraction. And so we could take them all. And we could. The weight-wise wouldn't have been an issue because they were just not very heavy. Mm. And so we did that. And I didn't like the idea, but I wasn't going to say no. And as you're coming in on the final approach, you could see people you could see the enemy. And I remember quick prayer. I said, what's this going to feel like, Lord, to die? And he said, don't worry about it. So continue.
He said, who was
that's the voice I heard in my head.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. So as we're going in, both sides this is a mountaintop now. It's a peak. It's probably maybe 3 times the size of this room, but it sloped down drastically in all sides of it. And there's a big rock in the middle and all this kind of stuff. And I could see on the edge all the way around on the right and left side pith helmets. This was NVAs. These guys were for real. We knew our shit was weak. Mm-hmm. We got to the LZ. The pilot did an excellent job. He never really sat down, but we heard what sounded like a buzzsaw. And that was just the fact we took so many rounds, so short a period of time, that the aircraft was being torn to pieces. And I looked off, I could tell this story could take 20 minutes. Basically, I looked to the right, and I could see the eyes of the NVA shooting. He's holding his AK like this and looking me in the eye. And so he wasn't even aiming where he was looking. We only had one casualty, and it was minor. He got hit in the chest with a 30 AK. It shattered the chicken plate, and a piece of it hit him up here, and he had blood all over the place. And it pretty well knocked him out, too, the impact. And he landed in my lap. And, of course, that's where the controls were. So I had to pick him up, and they say I almost threw him out. Because I didn't know my left arm could do that. But he was all right. And the gunner on the other side, he had the zipper shot off his fly. And, they zip down. So I had a round go through my flight suit on the pants, and I had a round go through my helmet. And I don't know about the other guy. I never saw him again after we got recovered. And somebody stole my helmet. I guess it's sitting on somebody's mantle right now. But we made a normal landing on Keeshan. Now, the pilot, which is the reason we're still alive, he never changed the power setting on that aircraft. Now, because once we took the fire, I started looking at the gauges, reading what was going on. Almost every light lit up. fire light, engine out, everything was lighting up. The engine still was running, even though just everything was lit up. And the Cobras were telling us we were on fire. We had flames coming out, smoke. He never did a rapid movement with the controls, and he never changed the power setting. So we landed, normal shutdown, 2-minute shutdown on the aircraft. And then we stripped it of its electronics and all that we could. And I went out on one aircraft with one of the crew, and another aircraft took out the other pilot and the other crew member. And the crew chief told me that Bell Helicopter told him that aircraft should have imploded at the top of the mountain. And they don't know why it didn't. And then I said, well, I was asked some questions, and I said, well, he never changed the power setting. So, well, that's probably it, because if he pulled up on the power, it probably would have caused the transmission to fall apart, because it was missing teeth in the transmission, and the oil pump was gone, the generator was punctured, lost several blades in the compressors and all that. Why it didn't quit, they don't know either. But and then when they picked up the aircraft with a Chinook to take it back to Marble Mountain, one of the blades, and I thought I had a picture, I couldn't find it. The blades are about this wide, and I forgot the inches, but there was 4 rounds, just like perforation right across it. And when the Chinook picked it up, the blade just fell down, it bent down. So, but it held us in the air for probably a 1.5 mile flight, as we descended down from the top of the mountain to Keeshan. And the angle was perfect. It was like almost a normal landing. But so it's kind of amazing. And I went looking for that pilot the next day, and nobody knew where he was. Couldn't find him at all. The CO just said he's left the unit. That was it. Last I heard of him. And
so you've talked about when you were flying Loaches, you were taking contact all the time.
Just about, yeah.
You talked about, you've had a Huey basically just disintegrate around you from enemy fire.
Well, kind of. It looked good on the ground, though.
Was there ever a day where and again, and I say this as somebody who spent 15 months downrange in Iraq and Afghanistan, was there ever a day you just went, I'm not going back. Like, I don't think I can do it today. But then you got up and did it anyway.
I didn't have that thought process. I don't know if I never said that to myself that I can recall, but I knew I didn't want to have to do stuff that we did. And when you're taking fire, it's in a Loach, it's not even a second and a half, because by the time they get off a couple of rounds, you're gone and the Cobra's coming in. So, you could get shot at 100 times and still not have a minute's worth of enemy activity, or 2 minutes or whatever. And I think they said the life expectancy of a Loach was, down in the minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that has to be how many minutes you were under enemy fire. But the worst part to me was the psyching yourself up on the way out to the AO, and the relief that you felt coming back, because you were coming back.
So, and this happened to me, and I've talked to many people who had something similar happen, that you get so used to getting shot at that you just stop thinking about it. It just becomes part of the background noise. But then there's that one time when something happens that you go, holy cow, I could get killed here.
Yeah.
Did those happen to you when you were there?
Yeah. On the way out is when you really, and I'm thinking, are you going to come? Are you going to be okay to come back for lunch? You're going out early in the morning. Am I going to have lunch today?
Yeah.
Or if you're going out in the afternoon flight, am I going to live to have dinner? And you can, of course, it's hot and all that kind of stuff over there, but I think you could smell your own fear, and you definitely were scared. You didn't show it because everybody was. You just had a job to do, and that's what you went out to do. I don't think I had. If I did, I'd pushed him aside.
Okay.
Thoughts like that.
So, and if you're not comfortable answering this question, I'll understand. You went to a Catholic high school.
Mm-hmm.
I assume you grew up in a Catholic family.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about praying. You talked about hearing an internal voice in your head that told you everything was going to be fine.
Well, said okay.
It said going to be okay. Okay. All right. So, but on literally your first flight, the aircraft commander looks over at the gunner and said, "Did you get any of the kids?" So, one of the most meaningful things I've read said that war is inherently a moral injury. Did you struggle with that at all, or was it just part of the job?
And since I wasn't at the controls,
Mm-hmm.
I guess had a little distance. But his concern was he didn't want to see the kids hit either.
But
yeah, but no, it didn't.
okay.
But that's why I never flew over a village.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you had to. I'm just wondering if you did.
No, not in that regards. No, there was one time where I had when I was flying Hueys, we'd take candy to places, and when the kids would gather around, throw candies. Crew chief said this kid just planted a booby trap on the aircraft. Kid's this high. He's probably 8 years old, and so I stopped doing that. I wouldn't let anybody get within 30 meters or 30 feet of the aircraft. I told the gunners after that, if anybody tries to get closer to that, shoot them. I didn't care who they were, what age they were. Never had that happen, but we did keep them at a 30-foot because I didn't want little kids coming up and putting a bomb on the aircraft.
And putting you in that position.
Yeah.
Where you hit it. Yeah.
And I wasn't the only one that found that to be an issue. So you learn from listening to other people too. And so you didn't necessarily have to have the experience to know I need to protect myself in case from and it paid off, I think, in the long run.
Okay, so you got your, I don't know, do they call them DEROS dates in Vietnam? Your date for return to the United States?
Yeah.
Okay. So that date has arrived. Talk about coming back to the States.
I don't remember much, which is interesting. The date arrived. Life is going on as normal. And a Jeep comes by. I throw my duffel in the back of it. Next thing I know, I'm back in the States. Didn't say goodbye to anybody. Nobody said goodbye to me. Nobody knew. You didn't know when the guy next to you was going to disappear. And there's not numerous, I'd say several times that I went looking for somebody to have a drink with or smoke a cigarette, just general BS, and found that he'd gone home.
How did that affect you, knowing that guys were just pulling out with no notice?
There was no synergy within the unit as far as I was concerned. The camaraderie, I didn't sense that at all, and I was disappointed in that because things could happen so fast. When I went from F Troop to brigade headquarters, it was no more than 30 minutes after I was told I was going that I was at the new headquarters, my gear. I mean, it was just that fast. So no one from Blue Ghost did I get to talk to that I was leaving.
So it seems like the process killed unit cohesion.
I think it did.
Yeah.
I was at the last year. My unit had a reunion in Ozark or Dothan.
Yeah.
And I went to it. It's the only one I've ever been to, and it's because of its proximity to Montgomery. And there was there's an organization down there, Friends of Army Aviation, and they fly Hueys. And so we all went on a ride on the Huey. I took my wife and kids and went on. I had to sit in the back, but well, actually, I'm with them. I joined the organization. I volunteer and I go down there, and I'm current medically and got all the equipment to start flying with them. And they've just got to run me through the orientation course, and I'll be flying a Huey again. Hopefully, there's always, it's a nonprofit. Nobody gets paid a dime, and there's requirements as to how it works to get someone who hasn't flown in a while in the cockpit. So they may not be able to afford it. It may be time consuming, but I can crew an aircraft. I can pre-flight the stew out of it now. Yesterday I pre-flighted inside, and I did stuff I hadn't done in years.
But you went to the reunion. How was that?
That was interesting because there were some individuals there that were very, very close from Vietnam. Uh, One of them, I flew with him when he first got there. I think I was his orientation ride to the area. He flew Cobras, and his front seat was at the reunion also. And so they were very close. And there were several other groups that were close. But most, I don't know how many of them flew together because the unit was there for 6-7 years in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So every year or so, the whole unit turned over. But there seemed to be a lot of, but mostly enlisted. And I can see that the enlisted, for the most part, they work together, groups, crew chief, gunners, and those, they work together. And the aircrafts would be side by side while they're being worked on, so there's a lot of communication,
back and forth.
camaraderie. And because I was a 67 N20 trainee, I wanted to work on the aircraft too. And I was asked to, hey, can you come over to our hooch tonight? We'll have a few beers. And so I said, sure. And I went over and, patronizing with the enlisted, I guess. And they were very, very nice, but they said, we don't want your help. And that hurt my feelings, and I guess it showed on my face. They said, "Sir, it's not because we dislike you. It's because we talk about you and your other pilots and that, and you don't want to hear what we say sometimes. We might think you're the worst pilot in the whole damn company. We don't, but we might." So we had a few beers, and I left, and I never tried to assist him with the 25-hour inspection or any of that since then.
So where'd you land when you came back to the States?
Fort Lewis, Washington.
And how long were you there for?
I think it was get off. I don't remember if we stayed there for a night or two or what. Okay. I know they put us on a plane to San Francisco, and that's where the Army said goodbye to me. Now I was still in uniform, and so I think you had to buy your own ticket to go from San Francisco to New York. I couldn't remember.
So you were released from the Army in San Francisco.
I think it was in Fort Lewis, Washington,
okay.
And they sent us to. I don't remember who paid for the ride, but I know when I got on the plane in San Francisco, they put me in first class.
So yeah, you got immediately discharged coming out of Vietnam, basically.
Yes. Now I was asked if I wanted to stay in. And I said, I don't think so. Because I asked, well, what would I be doing if I stayed in? They told me I'd come back to Rucker, probably get an instructor rating or transition to the Cobra, and then go back to Vietnam, train ARVNs. I said, no, I wasn't going to do that. Now, if I had said yes, I would never have gone back because the war was over.
Yeah.
Before you could snap your fingers. But
do you ever second guess that decision, or you just
not second guess it? Just it would have led me down a whole new, different path of life, and I don't know where that would have been taken. Friends that did stay in the military, a lot of them were, 6 months, a year later, told to get out because the reduction in force. And I've got a friend that stayed in National Guard. We flew together, and that's where I met him, in the National Guard. Heck, he made a career out of aviation, and he...
This is killing me. But anyway, keep going.
And he, flew commercial, he became a major, back to a warrant officer, back up to a captain. I mean, the Army just kept moving around. I think he has a retirement, state troopers, Army, and civilian life. But, everybody did something different. So that might have been my path, but... Instead, I went back, stayed in the South to get a education because it's cheaper down here than Connecticut.
So, okay, you're in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Where'd you go next? Did you go back home to Connecticut?
Home. Yeah.
What was the engagement like? What with your parents and with your brothers?
Well, they were real happy. We had a get together and all that. My parents never really said much to me but my brothers said they were just pins and needles the whole year I was gone. And my mother had, back in the late 60s, developed cancer and is fighting battles with that.
Mm-hmm.
So she was really relieved that everything worked out, and she passed away in '74. But when I went to the old hangouts, they weren't the same anymore, of course. I mean, it'd been, how long was from 68 to 72, we're talking 3.5 years roughly. They just weren't the same hangouts, but I ran into a person here and there that I knew, and they all said, "Oh, your crowd goes over here now." So I went to that place.
By your crowd, what do they mean by that?
Folks I grew up with,
Okay.
high school with, and I walked in there and immediately saw 8 or 10 people that I knew really well, and most of them didn't have a clue that I'd been in the military, and they'd asked me, "Where you been?" I said, "I was in the Army." "Did you go to Vietnam?" I said, "Yeah." They turned around and walk away. I thought that was, what's this about? There was 1 or 2 that were Vietnam veterans or in the military during that time frame, and they weren't they weren't like that. But those that had never been in the military were like that, and some of them I think would have liked to have gone to Canada, but there is an interesting group of people. But then I found out that other places you were kind of shunned, but then other groups embraced you with a lot of the veterans. So there was kind of like a division, and I don't know. I didn't sense that people really wanted to. They didn't want to talk about Vietnam. That was for sure. And so when it came time to figure out what I was going to do next, college was finish off college, take the CLEP test, and all this kind of stuff. Well, going to school in Connecticut was a lot more expensive than in the South.
So where'd you go to school at?
I went to a quarter out at Enterprise Junior College,
Yeah.
and then came up to Troy, main campus, and finished off the degree in a year and a half.
Okay.
And then started working for a living. I had a lot of different jobs, but I'd get bored after a while. But I always enjoyed what I was doing. And then about 2 or 3 years later, I'd say, "I wonder if the grass is greener over here," and looking for promotions and raises and all that.
Did you stay in the same career field the whole time, or did you move around?
Interesting. I was accounting degree.
Okay.
And so I was with the banking department for a couple, 3 years. And then I went with the federal government as Inspector General for HHS.
Okay.
And so that was an auditing position, more than well, even the banking department was an auditing position, but it was a financial audit. HHS was more of a operational auditing, which I really, really got into. And then I went private industry again as an auditor, and then I did CFO at a place for a couple, 4 years, and then went with the Attorney General's office here in Alabama as a chief auditor. So I liked auditing. I was more comfortable with that.
Okay.
It wasn't structured like financial auditing is.
So you went into the National Guard.
Yeah.
When was that? When did you join the Guard?
I got back in '72, so I think it took about a year for me to decide that I wanted to fly again. I was just really, I missed it, so I went back to fly.
That was the Alabama Guard?
Yes, yeah.
And where was your unit at?
Florence.
Okay, wow, way up in North Alabama, yeah.
And the aircraft are maintained at Danley in Montgomery.
Yeah.
And I was living in South Alabama at the time. So I'd drive up to Montgomery with a couple of other guys that were instructors out at Fort Rucker. And we'd pick up our aircraft there, and we'd fly to our various units. Because all the aircraft, and now Florence, the folks up there, they had to wait for us to bring the aircraft up for them to have aircraft to fly. So most of my flight time was flying up to Florence, and then I'd turn the aircraft over to somebody else, and then I'd get it back to fly home. But yeah, that was, I enjoyed that, flying up to North Alabama. Then the unit moved, it was shut down, and became one in Tuscaloosa. So you'd fly into the where we'd land was right near the stadium, football stadium. and so I never flew over a crowded stadium. Flew around them a few times, but never over them. And we'd come in over the Alabama Stadium, probably 50 feet over the walls, and just come in, and did the same over at Auburn a couple of times. And the FAA one time told me to quit doing flying. I was flying around an Auburn, Alabama game, but I was about 500 feet above the stadium, and they told me I needed to go somewhere else.
So how long did you stay in the Guard?
Till 77.
Okay.
Yeah, the conflict between flying and working really, really started to wear me down because I was traveling 100% on the job.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I had to maintain currency, and they insisted on 2 aircraft. I had to maintain the 086 and the Huey. And on top of that, I had my first job, after I left my first job to go active duty to get my instrument ticket. And which I did, but now I had, and Army regulations required that I maintain that instrument ticket. And the 086 was not an instrument aircraft. So, and I was flying that most of the time to take it up to Florence. So, or over to Tuscaloosa, either one. And so when I would go to fly the Huey, it was a couple times I actually had to take a currency check ride to fly the Huey to take my instrument check ride. So I haven't been flying instruments in quite a while, and that's kind of stuff, use it or lose it type thing.
Yeah.
Now, having the hood on and flying the gauges, that's no issue. But the regulations as to reporting altitudes, doing all the stuff that you got to do, I had to get current with that again. And I remember my instructor, he would, or check ride, he'd flunk me almost every time. And he'd laugh about it, says, okay, here's what you're weak at. We'll do the check ride again day after tomorrow. And so we do the check ride day after tomorrow, and I'd fly it, no problem. But 6 months later, I might be in the same boat. Got to get a check ride to get the fly of the Huey again. Then I had to go take a check ride for the instruments, and I really wore out on that because I used all my. I remember one time when I was in the area, I think I flew every day, and I worked full time, and I go fly every night for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and just to get currency and do the requirements for night flight and all that. And I just got tired of that, and I lost the enjoyment of flying.
Okay, you're not the first person I've ever heard say that.
Yeah.
So you're married.
Yeah.
When did you meet your wife?
In 76. Now
I'm not going to tell her if you don't come up with the exact date.
no,
So that's.
I was just coming off a divorce. So
Okay.
And it was about a month or so later that I met her.
So,
but it was probably 4 or 5 months later before we.
how long had you been married the first time?
4 years.
And that was after Vietnam.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think your service and the aftermath of that service had an impact on that? And again, that's one of those questions if you're not comfortable. I'm okay.
I don't have a clue.
Okay.
I don't have a clue. I knew I had more of a anger management for a short time,
Mm-hmm.
but I was always known to be short-tempered even when I was.
Okay. So how'd you meet your wife?
We lived in the same apartment complex, and there was a group, a clique, and it was a large clique, probably 15, 20 people in it, and they all hung out together, and a couple of the guys and I made friends, and then next thing you know, I'm meeting everybody else, and Kay was part of that clique, and with her roommate was, and so actually I asked her roommate out, and she tried to help me get the roommate to say yes, but the roommate would never go out with me. And so I remember saying, well, how would you like to go do something? So anyway, that's it was a slow process. It took a while.
So when did y'all get married?
December of 77.
So
it wasn't long. We only knew each other 14 months before we got married.
Okay, that's I knew my wife about 14, 15 months when we got married. So I think that's okay. Um, did you have you talked to her? When did you talk to her about your experiences in Vietnam?
Uh, she never asked.
Mm-hmm.
She just might hear say, or I might start talking about something.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, I was flying when I met her, and I kept trying to get her to go up with me. And National Guard was a lot less strict back in those days, and I could have easily taken her on an aircraft and gone somewhere. But she just said, I don't like flying. She flew with a friend of hers years earlier and scared the hell out of her, and so she won't fly. And I was surprised last year I got her in the Huey, but so she found out incrementally,
Okay.
but no direct questions, or very rarely.
Hmm.
So never asked me, oh, what was it like to shoot at somebody. She never asked those kind of
Yeah.
questions. I wouldn't have had to answer it anyway because I was a pilot. I didn't shoot at people but one time, and that's a story that I find. I'll go ahead and digress back to that. Every now and then I'd fly Cobra, and I'd sit in
Mm-hmm.
the front seat, and we're got troops on the ground, and there's this big tree line, and troops are coming in from the west side, and they encountered the Charlie in the middle of that green area, and we were called in for air support because they were taking heavy fire, and so I'm the gunner, and I knew we were on the west side, bad guys were on the east side, so I walked the rounds into the tree line, and the ground commander said, "You're on target. You're on target. Keep it up. Keep it up." And as that was going on, why the pilot left this on, I don't know, but the radio was on. We're listening to Armed Forces Radio Network Vietnam, and the song that was on, this is a WTF moment. Uh, I'm listening to Maggie May by what's his name,
Rod Stewart.
Rod Stewart, and I'm firing miniguns at people. And I said, this is just doesn't make sense to me. And every time Maggie May comes on the radio, I'd say 50% of the time I just turn the channel immediately, and the other 50% of the time I listen to it. I have no idea. I don't dislike the song. I never disliked it, but it just the conflict of listening to that while shooting at people always was a wow. What's going on here? Why would it's like getting on the bus with chicken wire on it or something like that. It's a whole new experience that you don't want to have to do very often.
So, what lessons did you take away from writ large your time in the military and specifically your time in Vietnam?
I don't think I thought about it that deep to think of, oh, what have I learned? What haven't
Mm-hmm.
I learned? I always enjoyed the flying. The countryside over there was gorgeous, and I did a lot of flying on my own in the 086. When I wasn't flying the combat mission, when I wasn't doing a scout mission, I might be doing, delivering something here or taking somebody over there, and so I had a lot of freedom as to territory and altitudes and such, and just the mountains. It was all just gorgeous, and waterfalls that just blow your mind away. But you wondered why people how they could fight like that. You had the Charlie lived in the bush, and I mean he had no luxuries whatsoever, and then you had the mountain yards. It just the villages. You'd fly over these villages, and they're dirt shacks, hooches built on, and yet they could, if you flew too low to them, you might get shot at.
So, I'm going to change my next question a little bit based on what you just said. You did you ever question? I mean, as dedicated as the adversary was in that war, did you ever question while you were there? while you were there, did you ever question why you were there?
I accepted the reason we were there at the beginning was the domino theory and all
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. And towards the end of the tour, the North was building roads into the South Vietnam. I mean, I was in country when an OH-6 got shot down with a SAM, and I said, that's an expensive trade-off. And while I was still in I Corps, there were sections I wouldn't go into that I used to go in all the time. You know, up along Quang Tree, the Ashaw Valley area, and all that. I stayed south of that. Everybody did. It wasn't just me. It was the nature of the assignments we had. But I think you stop thinking about why we were here because we were there and you had to deal with the situations as they presented themselves. And you know, this name of the program you have, what is it for heroes?
Yeah, Game Day Heroes.
Game Day Heroes. And I've told you I didn't like the term heroes because I don't think a person becomes a hero out of choice. If you're doing what you're supposed to do, how can you be called a hero? You know, firefighter, police officer, if you're just doing what you're supposed to do. But then circumstances can create an environment like Novacell. I mean, just what he did for a job got him in the circumstances where he ended up getting the Medal of Honor. And I had never met a person that said, "I'm going to go fly a mission today or do something on the ground that it's going to get me the Medal of Honor." And you don't win it. It's not a prize. It's you're lucky to be alive to receive it. So, and I feel that way. The term is overused to me.
Has your service in Vietnam impacted the way you view? I mean, the country's been in at least 3 wars.
Oh yeah.
Since I mean, there was the first Gulf War, there was Afghanistan, there was Iraq. Did your service in Vietnam? Do you think it colored your view of those events as they evolved? Has it changed did it change the way you look at the military, the way you look at warfare in general?
Not until the last few years, and it wasn't because of Vietnam. The military's changed so much. When Gulf War I came out, what was that, 92?
91.
91. I was working Montgomery, and I got a phone call from a friend of mine that I flew with that was also he was on the list of recall. And he said, "You are on the second round of list of recall." And I was thinking, well, hell, I haven't flown a helicopter in 12 years. I think, 77, 87, 13 years, 13, 14 years. He said, if they have the projected casualties, you'll be activated. And I think he threw out a number like 10,000. I don't know if he's right or wrong. But, and then I thought about it. I said, well, after it was all over, I thought about signing up, putting my hand up in the air and saying, you can go ahead and do that. But I had a 92, I had an 11-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son, and a wife that would have been very, very unhappy. And I said, well, I could just volunteer and not tell her I volunteered.
But sooner or later she would have found out. You know that, right?
So and of course the way the thing went, we lost 40 troops, and that was about it. And that was just a one-time thing, hitting the tent. But no, I didn't do that. But I thought about it, but it wasn't ever a serious. I thought about how to go about doing it, and but I never seriously thought about doing it, if that makes sense. And I am surprised, looking back over the 50 years, of how many conflicts we are in, and that the Navy in the Asian Pacific, where is it, the Gulf, where shooting at the Houthis. I mean, we send F-18s out all the time, and we're blowing up places all over the world. And you realize we're not at peace at all. We're in a constant state of battles here and there. the average person here hasn't got a clue about them.
So let me ask you this: jump way back. You were aware of Vietnam because you were in the Army already, and you knew you were anticipating that you were going to go to Vietnam.
Well, I was well aware of Vietnam
Yeah.
before I joined the
Yeah.
military.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had a base of knowledge of what was at least being publicly given to people about the war in Vietnam. Did you see the war on the ground or in the air in your case? Did you see the war in Vietnam differently when you were in Vietnam? Did you think the people back in the States were getting an accurate picture of what was happening in country?
Well, I guess I was micro
Yeah.
experiencing the war. People back home were getting a macro
Okay.
view of it, and I didn't really have a clue what was going on in the States while I was in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And even before I went to Vietnam, before I was in the military, I really didn't know what was going on in Vietnam either, other than it was a conflict and a friend of mine was killed and I went to his funeral. That was in, I guess, 66, 67. So, be honest with you, I was ignorant. I didn't pay
Okay.
much attention to politics. I didn't pay attention to world affairs. I knew the war was going on, and I thought it was something you were supposed to do, so I did it.
I was just wondering if how that would have affected. We were at war for 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was just wondering if how that affected the way you perceived what the government was saying, no matter who was in the White House, what the government was saying about how wars were going. If that caused you to question them more.
Iraqi and Afghanistan, I never could fully understand why it was taking so long. I didn't know what our goals were. You go back to the same thing people said about Vietnam.
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't know
That's kind of where
Yeah.
this question's coming from.
You didn't have a sense of purpose. The beginnings of Vietnam, you did stop communism. Well, if you take Google Maps and go out and look at Vietnam, look at the coastal areas where I was based all the time, Marble Mountain, Da Nang, flew up to Hue a lot, and all down the Chu. It's all condominiums. It's all resort, one resort after the other. That country's doing really, really well, and I guess they're still communist, but I think they've been given a lot of freedom compared to their northern counterparts. But I like the idea of having a goal and one that you're going to stick with. And I didn't see that in Vietnam, especially towards the end. At the beginning, I did, but at the end, and in Afghan, I didn't see that at all. The whole thing. I don't think anybody did. Even I know our government didn't. We didn't know what. Bush got up there, and I was a Bush fan, but he got up there and said, we're successful. It's
Mission
over.
accomplished. Yeah.
And it wasn't.
I wound up in Iraq 14 months later, and I can guarantee you that the mission was not accomplished. So that sort of leads me into the sort of the concluding piece here. How often do you think about Vietnam and your service there?
I think about my time in the military in general. It's funny when you think back on things. You may disagree, but it depends on your own personal mindset at that time as to what lens you look through. So I can look back on Vietnam with a lens and say, "Oh, that I had a great time," but I'm eliminating a lot of things that I would say, "No, that was a bad time." And so, I don't talk about shootouts and all that with anybody. I found out people don't want to hear that, and it's not very exciting. Oh, it lasted 2 seconds, and they can't understand fear. They can't smell it, feel it, taste it, or anything. Where those that are there do. And so I have a couple, a couple things that like flying that congressman, and another one that I had a lot of fun with, and I always feel guilty about it, but everybody laughed when I got to the club that night and told them about it. I don't know if you want me to tell it or not.
About the congressman?
No, about this other kid, this other incident I did that was fun.
Oh, sure.
I was asked to go down that we were up at Marble Mountain, and I was asked to fly down to Chulai, which is where we used to be, and pick up a new guy. And he had been dropped off in Chulai by mistake. And so I flew down there, and it was dark. I left, the sun had just gone behind the mountains. So I left Marble Mountain, flew along the beach for half a mile, and then climbed up to about 3,000 feet. And the sun was back up again because now I was looking. And it was setting as I headed towards Chulai. And I lit up a cigarette and turned up the radio volume, and it was just like when you're 16 years old and you're listening to your favorite song on the interstate or someplace, and you pick up the speed 20 miles an hour, and everybody's having a good time. That's what it was like for me. And then I got down to Chulai, and I go to the hooch where this guy was, and I was to pick up this guy, and the sergeant comes out with this kid. And even though it was dark, now it was fully dark, he was, I could tell that this kid was 18 to 20, no more. And I'm not much older than that, of course. And when he got to the aircraft, the sergeant was strapping his duffel down in the back seat of the 06, and I could smell the supply room. He was in brand new fatigues. You could see the creases on his sleeve. His hat was not the normal. He folded it like a V. That's not how you did it. And he was just so young looking. And he got in the aircraft. I got him strapped in, and I said, "If you want to talk to me," I had a headset on. I asked him if he could hear me. He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, if you want to talk back, you have to press that button on the floor, and then to hear my response, you have to take your foot off it." And I said, "The other thing, don't ever touch the controls under any conditions, or I'll use my 38 on you." So we set the record straight. Of course, I knew he would. Anyway, so now this is the thing that I found really funny is as I was leaving Chulai, there was a village about 4 clicks to the north that we blew away and then rebuilt for them years before I got to Vietnam. But they were told that they can't ever have VC operations in that area again. So what Charlie did was he went about a click to the east of that village and set up a sniper position. Now, he only shot at aircraft leaving Chulai at night, and he never hit anything. You'd see the tracers go up. Now, I never saw this until this night. And so I decided I was going to see if Charlie was awake. And I flew towards that spot. And I was shocked when all of a sudden all these tracers start going up in the air, and I pressed the intercom button. I said, take it fire. And I rolled the aircraft down. I went down treetop level, or as close as I dared at night, and headed out towards the coast. And then when I hit the waves busted on the beach, I climbed back up to a couple thousand feet, turned the radio volume up, lit up a cigarette, and never said a word to the kid. And I looked over. I looked over at him, and he was crying. I was scared he wet his pants too. But anyway, I got him up, dropped him off where I needed to and he was with our unit, so I dropped him off wherever he needed to go, and then I went put the aircraft to bed. And I went to the officers club, and everybody laughed and joked about that. They thought that was just wonderful. And I'm thinking, and everybody agreed that he's going to tell everybody that was how about taking fire in an 086 flying up, and he's going to tell that story until the day he dies.